If you take a standard 5-gram dose of creatine right now to train, boost your brain power, your skeletal muscles will actually steal almost all of it before a single molecule ever reaches your head.
Yeah, the biology there is it's pretty counterintuitive for most people.
It really is.
Yeah.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. The wellness industry has this habit of treating the human body like, well, like a simple math equation. You want more energy, drink this. You want to sleep better, just swallow that.
Right, but the diagnostic landscape of cellular health, neurobiology, and aging, I mean, it just isn't a simple equation. It's incredibly murky.
Exactly. You walk into a pharmacy or scroll through a health blog, and you are immediately confronted by this wall of aggressive marketing. Every single bottle is promising to fix your sleep or optimize your mitochondria or give you the brain of a supercomputer.
And it can be completely overwhelming.
So today, our mission is to cut completely through that noise for you. We're taking a stack of cutting-edge clinical research to figure out what actually works, mechanically and biologically, when it comes to optimizing your health, your energy, and your longevity.
We're entirely discarding the hype today. We're just focusing purely on the data.
Right. And okay, let's unpack this because we have a really robust stack of sources today. Sure. We've got a detailed medical breakdown from UB on mitochondrial stacking, specifically looking at PQQ and CoQ10.
Which is fascinating stuff on a cellular level.
It really is. We also have a great transcript of a conversation between Dr. Rhonda Patrick and Dr. Peter Adia on the cognitive benefits of creatine, a peer-reviewed, double-blind trial from Scientific Research Publishing on food-grown magnesium, and this cutting-edge scientific bulletin on the bioavailability of natural senolytics.
And that data is wonderfully diverse. Frankly, a lot of it challenges the conventional wisdom you see repeated online. But we have to look at the body as an integrated, highly reactive system, not just a collection of isolated parts.
Right. It's all connected.
Exactly. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, today's journey needs to move logically through that system. We are going to start with foundational rest and cellular energy creation, because without those, I mean, cognitive enhancement is just a non-starter.
Makes total sense. You can't run the software if the hardware has no power.
Right. And from there, we'll examine how the brain triages energy under extreme stress. And finally, we're going to dive into the absolute frontiers of anti-aging science, specifically how to clear out damaged cells. But I should emphasize up front, our role here is to synthesize the data provided in these sources, not to prescribe a medical regimen to you.
Always good to get that disclaimer out of the way. So to build this house, we have to start at the absolute foundation. We have to start in bed.
The most important part of the day, really.
Honestly, yes. I'm pulling from a comprehensive article from Countryfile on baseline health supplements, and they refer to our first compound, magnesium, as the everyman of minerals. They note it's responsible for over 300 biological reactions in your body.
Yeah, every man is a good term, though. Physiological linchpin might actually be more accurate.
Yeah.
Magnesium is an essential cofactor.
A cofactor being, well, how would you define that for someone who doesn't read biochemistry textbooks?
Sure. In biochemistry, a cofactor is basically a non-protein chemical compound that's required for a protein's biological activity. So many enzymes in your body are effectively inert. They just don't do anything until magnesium ion physically binds to them.
Oh, wow. So the key in the ignition.
That's a great way to look at it. Without it, the transcription of DNA, the synthesis of proteins, the regulation of your muscular contractions, they all just begin to stutter. But the area where the clinical data is becoming highly compelling is its role in sleep architecture and the central nervous system.
Which brings us perfectly to the SERP study. This is a peer-reviewed, double-blind clinical trial published by Scientific Research Publishing.
And that double-blind part is crucial.
All right, this wasn't just some casual observational survey. This was a rigorous 8-week study with 80 participants. Half of them received a placebo, which was just microcrystalline cellulose.
Which is just an inert fiber, right?
Exactly. And the other half received 80 milligrams of something called food-grown magnesium.
Now, that food-grown designation is actually really relevant here because it speaks directly to bioavailability. That's a theme we're going to hit on repeatedly today.
Because what you swallow isn't necessarily what you absorb.
Exactly. Often, cheap supplements use magnesium oxide, which has a notoriously poor absorption rate in the human gut. For a lot of people, it mostly just acts as a laxative.
Not ideal if you're trying to sleep.
No, definitely not. But the researchers here use a complex form of magnesium designed to mimic how the mineral is matrixed into actual food tissue. This significantly enhances its transport across the intestinal lumen.
Right, so your body actually recognizes it as food and pulls it in. And the results they measured over those 8 weeks were highly significant. They tracked sleep quality using the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, or PSQI, alongside daily sleep diaries.
And what did the numbers look like by week 8?
Well, the participants taking the active magnesium saw a 32% increase in their reported sleep quality.
32% is a massive jump in a clinical setting.
It is, but I have to push back on that initial number just a bit. Because looking at the control data, the placebo group actually saw a 16% improvement in their sleep quality.
Ah, the placebo effect at work.
Right. If an inert fiber pill improves your sleep by 16%, how do we know the 32% in the active group isn't just, all in their heads? The placebo effect is famously strong when it comes to insomnia. You take a pill, you subconsciously grant yourself permission to relax, and suddenly you sleep better.
The psychology of taking a pill absolutely plays a role, which is precisely why that double-blind structure we mentioned is non-negotiable. That 16% improvement in the placebo group, that isolates the psychological variable.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, so the active group improved by double that amount. Statistically, that means the magnesium provided a measurable biological effect layered right on top of that psychological comfort.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, the SRB researchers, they actually anticipated the flaws of subjective reporting. People are notoriously bad at estimating how long they actually slept.
Well, I'm terrible at it. I always think I was awake for hours.
Right, most people do. So they supplemented the diaries with wrist-worn actigraphy devices to objectively track movement and sleep cycles.
Actigraphy being the accelerometers, right?
Yeah.
Similar to what's in a high-end smartwatch.
Similar technology, yes. They measure gross motor activity to estimate periods of sleep versus wakefulness. Though the study highlighted a really fascinating discrepancy that anyone who tracks their sleep with a watch should pay attention to.
What was the discrepancy?
The actigraphy devices slightly overestimated sleep duration compared to what the participants actually reported in their diaries.
Let me guess. Because if you are lying completely still in the dark, staring at the ceiling, paralyzed by anxiety about like a presentation at work the next day, the accelerometer just assumes you're in a deep REM cycle.
Exactly. Sleep is a deeply complex neurological state, not just an absence of physical motion. But even accounting for that discrepancy, the combined subjective and objective data pointed to a very clear biological benefit from the magnesium.
So let's get under the hood of that biology. We hear a lot in the wellness space about GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid.
The primary inhibitory neurotransmitter.
Right. And the standard analogy I always hear is that GABA is the brakes on a car. If your brain is a sports car speeding down the highway after a long, stressful day, GABA is the brake pedal. But I really want to know the mechanics here. How does magnesium physically press that brake pedal in your brain?
Well, to stick with your automotive mechanics analogy, magnesium doesn't just press the brake. It physically blocks the gas pedal from being depressed at all.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Let's look at the NMDA receptors in the brain. These are excitatory receptors. When a neurotransmitter called glutamate binds to them, they act like an open gate. They allow calcium ions to flood into the neuron, which causes that neuron to fire wildly.
Okay, so glutamate plus NMDA equals the gas pedal.
Exactly. Now, magnesium acts as a physical plug in this system. Because of its specific ionic size and its electrical charge, a magnesium ion literally wedges itself into the pore of that NMDA receptor channel.
Like a cork in a bottle.
Very much like that. So even if glutamate is present, even if your brain is trying to step on the gas, the calcium can't rush in. It chemically stops the brain from accelerating.
That makes so much more sense than just vaguely saying it calms you. It's literally plugging the excitatory channel so the neuron can't fire inappropriately.
And while it's doing that, it concurrently enhances the activity of GABA. It does this by binding to specific sites on the GABA receptor itself. It changes the receptor shape slightly so that when GABA binds to it, the channel stays open longer.
And what does staying open longer do?
It allows more chloride ions, which have a negative electrical charge, to enter the neuron. That negative charge hyperpolarizes the cell, making it extremely difficult for the neuron to fire.
So you really have this two-pronged mechanism going on. You're plugging the excitatory pathways and amplifying the inhibitory ones at the exact same time.
Yes. But the SRP study mentions this doesn't stop with just slowing the brain down. It actually repairs the signaling process of sleep itself by interacting with melatonin.
Right, the sleep hormone.
Through an enzymatic pathway, yeah. Magnesium is a required cofactor for the enzyme serotonin N-acetyltransferase.
It's a mouthful.
It is, but that specific enzyme is the rate-limiting step in the conversion of serotonin into melatonin in your body.
And melatonin doesn't just knock you out, right?
Correct. Melatonin is a chronobiotic hormone. It doesn't act like a sedative. Instead, it signals to your entire biological clock that the diurnal cycle has ended, and it's time to initiate the complex architecture of sleep.
So if you don't have adequate magnesium,
Without adequate magnesium, that conversion process bottlenecks, your melatonin levels stay low, and your circadian rhythm effectively loses its anchor.
which perfectly brings up something really striking in the data that goes way beyond just feeling rested.
Hmm.
The researchers used the DAS-21 scale, which measures depression, anxiety, and stress.
A very standard psychological baseline.
Right. And by week 8, the reported stress scores in the magnesium group dropped down to an average of 3.7.
And where was the placebo group?
The placebo group was sitting way up at 5.5.
This perfectly illustrates the bidirectional nature of stress and sleep, which is often this vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. Poor sleep elevates your evening cortisol and catecholamines, your fight or flight hormones.
Right. You wake up wired.
Exactly. That elevated baseline makes you feel stressed the next day, and then that psychological stress completely disrupts your sleep architecture the following night.
It's that classic 2.0 a.m. feedback loop. You're lying in bed, you're stressed that you aren't sleeping, which dumped adrenaline into your system, which ensures you definitely, absolutely won't sleep.
We've all been there. But by intervening with a biological agent that forces the NMDA receptors to plug and the GABA receptors to open, you are mechanically interrupting that loop.
It's just breaking the cycle.
Yes. And this raises an important question regarding preventative medicine. The study noted that these participants were categorized as otherwise healthy, meaning their baseline stress scores of 5.5 were still technically in the normal range.
But normal stress can easily tip over time, right?
Exactly. It can easily tip into chronic anxiety or clinical depression over a timeline of years. So if you can lower that stress score down to a 3.7 just by stabilizing the central nervous system at night, could you prevent a cascade into severe mood disorders a decade down the line?
That's incredible to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Intervening early with just a fundamental mineral cofactor is profound preventative maintenance.
It really is.
Okay, so we've pressed the brakes,
Yeah.
we've got the nervous system calmed, the sleep architecture repaired, the circadian clock properly anchored. You wake up feeling genuinely rested. But, once you're awake, just feeling rested isn't enough. Your body needs to actually generate the physical energy to operate during the day.
Right, you need power.
And that leads us to the microscopic reality of cellular metabolism, which is detailed in this UB doctor's note we have.
We are transitioning from the systemic feeling of wakefulness to the literal chemical production of ATP adenosine triphosphate. That is the energy currency of life. We are talking about the mitochondria.
And I'm going to stop you right there before you say the cliche. We are not calling them the powerhouses of the cell.
Fair enough. It is a bit overused.
That high school biology term just doesn't do justice to what's actually happening down there. I prefer to think of them as microscopic industrial turbines. And the UV note focuses on optimizing these turbines by stacking two very specific compounds.
Right, PQQ, which is pyrroloquinoline quinone, and CoQ10, or coenzyme Q10.
Exactly. So how do these turbines actually work with this stack?
Well, microscopic turbines is highly accurate when you look at the electron transport chain. Let's break down CoQ10 first. CoQ10 is a lipid-soluble, meaning fat-soluble molecule that our bodies synthesize natively. It resides deep within the inner membrane of the mitochondria.
Okay, so it's naturally in there.
Yes. When your body breaks down food, it strips high-energy electrons from that food. Those electrons are then fed into a series of protein complexes in the mitochondrial membrane. We just number them 1 through 4.
This is the electron transport chain.
Yes, exactly. As electrons bounce down this chain, their energy is used to pump protons across the membrane, which creates this massive electrochemical gradient. The gradient then flows back through a literal molecular motor called ATP synthase. It physically spins it to create ATP.
Like a hydroelectric dam.
Exactly like that. But here's the catch. Those electrons can't just float from complex I over to complex 3 on their own. They need a shuttle to carry them. Coenzyme Q10 is that shuttle.
Okay, so it moves the fuel down the line.
It physically ferries the electrons between the complexes. If you lack CoQ10, the electrons get backed up, the transport chain stalls, the proton gradient collapses, and ATP production just grinds to a halt.
And how do we feel that failure?
You experience that cellular failure as systemic physical and mental fatigue. You just feel completely drained.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. If CoQ10 is the shuttle that's keeping the existing turbines running efficiently, what is PQQ doing in this stack?
PQQ is a vitamin-like compound found in trace amounts in soil, kiwi fruit, and fermented soy. While CoQ10 optimizes the mitochondria you already have, PQQ acts as a genetic signal flare. It stimulates a process called mitochondrial biogenesis.
So it tells the cell to build more turbines.
Precisely. It activates specific signaling pathways in the cell, most notably a transcriptional coactivator called PGC1 alpha.
Okay.
When PQQ upregulates PGC1 alpha, that molecule travels into the nucleus of the cell, binds to your DNA, and literally turns on the specific genes required to assemble brand new mitochondria from scratch.
Oh, wow. So you aren't just fueling the engines you already have, you are actually increasing the total volumetric capacity of engines available to the cell.
You're expanding the factory. And the UB note emphasizes that these two compounds operate synergistically. They aren't just doing two separate jobs in isolation, they're actively helping each other.
Which is why practitioners recommend stacking them.
That synergy is exactly why clinical practitioners often recommend they be taken concurrently. PQQ actually has the ability to regenerate CoQ10.
Wait, really? How does it do that?
It reduces it back into its active electron-carrying form, which is called ubiquinol, after it has been oxidized during the transport process.
Yeah.
Furthermore, they are both highly potent antioxidants.
Which is crucial because those microscopic turbines produce a lot of exhaust, right?
The electron transport chain is not perfectly efficient, no. Sometimes, an electron slips off the shuttle before it reaches the end of the chain. When that happens, it binds to oxygen, creating a highly reactive molecule called a superoxide free radical.
And that's oxidative stress.
Exactly. If that free radical isn't neutralized immediately, it will literally rip electrons away from the mitochondrial membrane itself, damaging the very structure of the turbine. CoQ10 and PQQ act as scavengers, absorbing those rogue electrons before they can cause structural damage.
The UB note points out some specific demographics where this CoQ10 and PQQ stack isn't just a nice bonus, but a virtual necessity. The most glaring one to me is patients taking statins.
Yes.
Statins are cholesterol-lowering drugs taken by tens of millions of people globally.
And one of the most widely reported side effects of statin therapy is myopathy, severe muscle aches, cramps, and weakness. For a long time, the mechanism wasn't entirely understood, but the biochemistry is now very clear.
How do they cause muscle aches?
Well, statins work by inhibiting an enzyme called HMG-CoA reductase, which is essentially the master switch for cholesterol synthesis in the liver. However, that exact same biological pathway is responsible for the synthesis of CoQ10.
So by chemically blocking the production of cholesterol to save your heart, you are inadvertently turning off the factory that produces the shuttles for your mitochondrial electron transport chain.
Your skeletal muscle cells literally run out of CoQ10. If the electrons stall, ATP plummets, and the muscles, starved of energy, begin to ache and fail.
That's incredible.
Supplementing with CoQ10 bypasses that statin-induced blockade, restoring the shuttle system. And adding PQQ helps rebuild the mitochondria that may have degraded during that energy drought.
Ubi also touches on the concept of mitophagy, which I find fascinating. If mitochondrial biogenesis is the building of new turbines, mitophagy is the controlled demolition of the old, broken ones, right?
It is cellular quality control. Over time, mitochondria suffer cumulative damage from those escaped free radicals we talked about. They become bloated, inefficient, and leaky.
Like an old, rusty engine.
Yes. And if you allow them to remain, they take up space, they consume resources, and they spew out massive amounts of oxidative stress. Mitophagy is the process where the cell essentially engulfs the damaged mitochondrion in a membrane and digests it with enzymes.
So by clearing out the damaged units through mitophagy and building fresh ones via PQQ, you are actively manipulating a primary mechanism of cellular aging.
You're forcing the cell to constantly renew its power grid.
Okay, so we've established how to generate the energy. We have the turbines built and fueled. But if the body is a massive grid, how does it prioritize where that energy goes? Especially when the system is under extreme duress.
That is the million-dollar question.
And this brings us to a topic that completely changes the paradigm of a very famous supplement and introduces the hook we started the show with, creatine.
Right. For decades, creatine has been completely pigeonholed by its marketing. It has been viewed exclusively as a skeletal muscle enhancer for bodybuilders, sprinters, gym bros.
But looking at the transcript from the conversation between Dr. Peter Attia and Dr. Rhonda Patrick, two leading figures in longevity science and neurobiology, they aren't discussing bench press numbers at all. They're discussing the central nervous system.
What's fascinating here is that to understand why creatine is critical for the brain, we first have to respect the brain's metabolic demand. The human brain accounts for roughly 2% of an adult's total body weight. Yet at rest, it consumes a staggering 20% of your body's total basal metabolic
You've got
energy.
20% of the grid's power going to 2% of the mass. It's wildly disproportionate.
It is an evolutionary anomaly. It's an astonishingly greedy organ.
So how does creatine factor into keeping that massive grid online?
We just discussed how mitochondria produce ATP. When a neuron uses ATP to fire an action potential, it strips off one of its 3 phosphate molecules, releasing the energy bound in that chemical bond. The ATP then becomes ADP adenosine diphosphate.
It's essentially a depleted battery.
Precisely. To recharge it, it usually has to go all the way back through that slow mitochondrial electron transport chain we just outlined. But creatine circumvents that entirely.
It's the backup generator.
Specifically, it acts as a high-speed phosphate reservoir. In the body, it's stored as phosphocreatine. When ATP is depleted into ADP, an enzyme called creatine kinase immediately rips the phosphate off the creatine and slaps it onto the ADP, instantly turning it back into ATP.
Without needing the mitochondria at all.
It recharges the battery in a fraction of a second without needing oxygen or the slow metabolic machinery of the electron transport chain.
But this brings us back to that huge hurdle Dr. Patrick mentions in the transcript, the concept of the greedy muscles. Because if I take the standard 5-gram dose recommended on every tub of creatine in the world, why doesn't my brain get the benefit?
Because of biological priority and transporter density, skeletal muscle tissue is massive in volume compared to the brain, and it has a voracious appetite for creatine.
So it just hoovers it up.
Muscles are packed with specialized transport proteins designed to pull creatine out of the bloodstream. If you ingest 5 grams, your skeletal muscles act like a massive sponge, soaking up almost the entire dose before the blood even reaches the blood-brain barrier.
Leaving nothing for the brain.
The brain is left with trace amounts that are clinically insignificant for cognitive enhancement.
So the early studies looking at creatine for cognitive function, they often showed mixed or negative results simply because the researchers were drastically underdosing the subjects based on standard muscle protocols.
Exactly. They were looking at muscle data. To saturate the muscular sponge and ensure enough creatine spills over into the bloodstream to cross the blood-brain barrier, clinical data suggests you need to look at much higher doses in the range of 10 to 20 grams per day, especially during the loading phase.
I have to challenge the practicality of that, just based on sheer human physiology. If I attempt to consume 20 grams of creatine monohydrate powder at once, the GI distress is going to be severe. I mean, we are talking about acute stomach cramping and nausea.
And your concern is entirely grounded in the pharmacokinetics of the compound. Creatine is highly osmotic.
Meaning it pulls water.
When you dump 20 grams into your stomach, it doesn't immediately absorb. Because of its concentration, it violently pulls water out of your surrounding tissues and into the intestinal lumen.
And that massive influx of water into the gut is what causes the severe cramping and, well, diarrhea.
Yes, unfortunately. But Dr. Patrick addresses this practical hurdle in the transcript with a very specific anecdote.
Right. She talks about using high-dose creatine specifically to combat the profound cognitive fog of jet lag after a brutal trip to China. But she doesn't take 20 grams at once.
No, she spaces it out to avoid the osmotic shock. She mixes 5-gram doses into large volumes of water or tea and consumes them throughout the morning.
So by diluting it.
By diluting it and spacing the administration, the gut transporters have time to absorb it into the bloodstream without causing that sudden fluid shift in the intestines.
The jet lag anecdote is crucial for another reason, I think. Dr. Patrick makes a vital distinction about when creatine actually works for the brain. It doesn't necessarily elevate your IQ on a normal relaxed Tuesday. It operates, as she says, in the background of stress.
The contextual application is the key to understanding the data here. If you are perfectly rested, well-fed, and relaxed, your primary glucose metabolism and mitochondrial turbines are easily meeting the brain's energy demands. Extra creatine won't produce a noticeable subjective difference.
But the brain heavily triages energy during times of metabolic crisis.
Exactly.
Sleep deprivation being the most common crisis for most of us.
Sleep deprivation, severe emotional trauma, intense continuous academic testing, or hypoxia at high altitudes. In these states, the brain's baseline energy demands skyrocket to deal with the stress, but its metabolic efficiency plummets. It literally can't process glucose fast enough.
And that's when the backup generator kicks in.
Under those stressful conditions, if you have a robust, preloaded pool of phosphocreatine in the brain, It acts as a buffer. It maintains processing speed, working memory, and executive function. It basically prevents the cognitive crash by keeping the local ATP levels stable when the primary grid fails.
And the most devastating chronic form of brain stress is neurodegenerative disease. This brings up the most profound hypothesis discussed in the adiapatric transcript. We typically view Alzheimer's disease through the lens of amyloid plaques and tau tangles, these physical toxic buildups that smother neurons. But Dr. Adia approaches it from a metabolic angle. He frames Alzheimer's partly as a chronic energy crisis in the brain.
This metabolic hypothesis is gaining immense traction in modern neurology. Some researchers even refer to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes.
Really? Type 3 diabetes?
Yes. Because decades before the physical plaques become symptomatic, the neurons in an Alzheimer's patient's brain begin to lose their ability to effectively metabolize glucose. The insulin signaling in the brain becomes resistant. The neurons literally begin to starve for ATP.
So the plaques are just a symptom of the starvation.
The accumulation of plaques might actually be a downstream consequence of this primary energetic failure, yes. Dr. Patrick notes a pilot study where patients already diagnosed with mild to moderate Alzheimer's were given 20 grams of creatine daily, and they demonstrated measurable improvements in certain cognitive functions.
Because they completely bypassed the broken glucose system and handed the brain a direct line of phosphate.
Yeah.
But the real variable here is time. As Dr. Epitia points out, if you have a genetic predisposition to this metabolic failure, like the APOE4 allele, and you wait until the neurons are dead and the plaques have formed, it's just too late.
The damage is done.
The question is, if you start supplying the brain with massive reserves of creatine 10 or 20 years before the crisis hits, could you augment the ATP creation enough to delay the onset of the disease entirely?
It is the holy grail question of neuropreservation. From a clinical trial perspective, it's exceptionally difficult to execute. You can't easily run a 30-year placebo-controlled double-blind trial on tens of thousands of people to see who gets dementia.
Right, the logistics are impossible.
But physiologically, the logic is ironclad. If neurons die because their primary energy grid fails, providing them with a robust, lifelong alternative energy recycling mechanism offers profound structural and functional protection over a lifespan.
And it isn't just the brain that requires this systemic protection as we age. The country file source highlights a completely different, highly vulnerable demographic that should be actively utilizing creatine, postmenopausal women.
This ties back to the broader systemic impacts of hormonal shifts. Estrogen is not just a reproductive hormone. It is deeply involved in metabolic regulation across the entire body. In the brain, estrogen helps regulate glucose transport. In the skeletal system, estrogen regulates osteoblasts, which are the cells responsible for building new bone. When a woman goes through menopause, estrogen levels plummet precipitously,
which triggers a massive systemic shock.
On average, women can lose up to 10% of their total bone density in the first 5 years following menopause, drastically increasing the risk of osteoporosis and fractures. Simultaneously, the loss of estrogen signaling in the brain contributes to the well-documented brain fog and mood disruptions.
While the muscles undergo accelerated sarcopenia, or age-related muscle loss, it's a triple threat.
But the data in Country File shows that if a postmenopausal woman combines creatine supplementation with heavy resistance training, the results are staggering. It doesn't just slow down the decay. The creatine provides the intracellular energy required for the osteoblasts to actively maintain and even increase bone mineral density.
All while preserving lean muscle mass better than training alone.
It is a dual-action armor. It preserves the structural integrity of the skeletal system while simultaneously providing the neurological energy buffer to counteract the loss of estrogen-mediated glucose metabolism in the brain.
The narrative around creatine is just undergoing this massive paradigm shift. It is transitioning from a niche athletic enhancer to a non-negotiable foundational tool for healthy neurological and physical aging.
I couldn't agree more.
So we've explored how to protect the brain's invisible energy pathways. But what about the physical hardware itself? The literal gray matter and cellular membranes? This leads us to our fourth area of focus, returning to the Country File source, omega-3 fatty acids.
If creatine is the backup energy generator, omega-3, specifically EPA and DHA, are the physical brick and mortar of the facility. The Country File article emphasizes a unique pharmacokinetic property of omega-3s, their specialized ability to cross the blood-brain barrier.
We throw the term blood-brain barrier around a lot in wellness, but let's define it physically. It's essentially the brain's bouncer, right?
Very much so. It's a highly selective filtration mechanism made up of tightly packed endothelial cells and astrocytes that line the capillaries in the brain.
So it lets the good stuff in, but keeps the bad stuff out.
It lets small molecules like water and oxygen in, but it is ruthlessly effective at keeping toxins, pathogens, and heavy metals out of the brain tissue. The tight junctions between those cells are virtually impenetrable to most large molecules.
Which is a problem for drug delivery, usually.
A massive problem. Because it is so selective, many beneficial therapeutic compounds we ingest or even synthesize in the lab never actually reach the brain tissue. They bounce off the barrier and are excreted. But omega-3 fatty acids, specifically DHA, are granted VIP access.
How do they get past the bouncer?
The blood-brain barrier contains specialized transporter proteins, primarily one called MFSD2A. This protein is designed exclusively to grab DHA from the bloodstream and pull it directly into the brain.
And once it's pulled inside, what is it physically doing?
It integrates directly into the phospholipid bilayer of the neurons. Every cell in your body is encased in a membrane made of 2 layers of fat.
Right.
The composition of that fat matters immensely. If the membrane is composed of rigid, saturated fats, the cell becomes stiff. Receptors on the outside of the cell can't move around effectively to catch neurotransmitters.
So communication slows down.
DHA is a highly unsaturated fat, meaning its molecular structure is fluid and kinky. When neurons incorporate high levels of DHA into their membranes, the membrane becomes highly fluid and flexible.
Like oil instead of butter.
Precisely. That fluidity allows neurotransmitter receptors to slide around the membrane rapidly, catching signals efficiently. It optimizes synaptic transmission. It is literally lubricating the hardware of the brain to ensure rapid cellular communication.
And the macro-level evidence of this microscopic lubrication is astonishing. The Country File article cites volumetric data from Alzheimer's Research UK. They took MRI scans of individuals and compared them against their blood lipid profiles. The data shows that individuals with higher circulating levels of omega-3s actually possess a physically larger hippocampus.
The hippocampus is the primary locus for learning, memory consolidation, and spatial navigation.
The memory center.
Crucially, it's the region of the brain that typically suffers the most rapid and severe atrophy in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. To demonstrate a physical, volumetric difference in the size of the hippocampus based on dietary nutrient intake is profound.
It implies you can physically bulk up the brain's memory center through structural nutrition.
And this structural defense is supported by massive epidemiological studies. The source references a 2023 meta-analysis out of China. They reviewed a vast array of high-level evidence and concluded that maintaining a moderate dietary intake of omega-3 fatty acids is associated with a 20% lower risk of all-cause dementia or cognitive decline.
In the realm of epidemiology, a 20% risk reduction for a pathology as complex as dementia is massive. If you applied a 20% reduction across a global population, you were talking about millions of individuals retaining their cognitive faculties and independence for years longer than they otherwise would.
And the dosing recommendation to achieve this structural armor is highly accessible, 250 to 500 milligrams a day of combined EPA and DHA.
You don't even need a prescription for that. You can obtain that from a high-quality fish oil, or if you're a vegan, there are excellent supplements derived directly from the marine algae that the fish eat to get their omega-3s in the first place.
It underscores a philosophical shift in how we view aging. Cognitive decline is often accepted as an inevitability of passing time. The data suggests it is, at least partially, a consequence of structural degradation that can be actively mitigated if you provide the body with the right structural materials.
Okay, let's take a breath, because we are about to make a hard pivot. We've built the foundations, we've optimized sleep architecture, supercharged the mitochondria, and armored the brain with creatine and omega-3s, but we are fighting entropy here. Over a lifespan, things will go wrong. Cells will suffer catastrophic damage, DNA will fray. If a cell is damaged beyond repair, how does the body get rid of it so it doesn't stick around and cause collateral damage?
This transitions us from the foundational country file basics to the deeply technical scientific bulletin on what are known in the literature as senolytics. We are stepping onto the absolute bleeding edge of longevity science now.
This is the most fascinating part of the deep dive for me. The bulletin introduces the biological concept of senescent cells, and in the longevity community, they have a much more evocative nickname, zombie cells.
Zombie cells is a remarkably accurate descriptor of their biological behavior. Normal human cells have a finite lifespan, dictated by something called the Hayflick limit.
Which is what exactly?
Every time a cell divides, the protective caps on the ends of its chromosomes, called telomeres, get slightly shorter. Eventually, the telomeres become too short, or the cell accumulates too much damage from oxidative stress or radiation. At that point, a healthy cell will trigger a process called apoptosis.
Programmed cellular suicide.
It's a highly orderly, altruistic process. The cell dismantles its own DNA, breaks itself into neat little packages, and signals the immune system's macrophages to come and clear the debris away. It falls on its sword for the good of the surrounding tissue.
But the zombie cells don't do that.
Senescent cells are the cells that refuse to die. They suffer severe DNA damage, they permanently stop dividing, their functions fail, but the apoptotic self-destruct mechanism jams. They survive in a state of suspended animation.
Which would be fine if they just sat there quietly. But the bulletin explains that they are actively hostile to the tissue around them.
They are incredibly toxic. Zombie cells secrete a potent cocktail of pro-inflammatory cytokines, chemokines, and tissue-degrading proteases. In the scientific literature, this toxic cloud is known as SASP, the senescence-associated secretory phenotype.
It sounds like a poison gas.
It operates like one on a microscopic level. The SASP secretions literally infect the neighboring, perfectly healthy cells. The inflammatory signals overwhelm them, dragging them into senescence as well.
Like a zombie biting someone else.
It creates an expanding epicenter of localized inflammation that physically degrades the tissue architecture. If biological aging is a slow-burning fire in the body, senescent cells are the arsonists actively pouring gasoline on it. Accumulation of these cells is now recognized as a primary causal driver of major age-related pathologies, including atherosclerosis, osteoarthritis, and systemic metabolic dysfunction.
Enter the senolytics. These are compounds specifically designed to hunt the zombies. The bulletin focuses heavily on naturally occurring compounds that have been discovered to selectively induce apoptosis in senescent cells.
They essentially locate the jammed self-destruct switch in the zombie cell and force it into the on position without harming the healthy cells nearby.
And the natural world has provided several highly promising candidate molecules for this. The bulletin highlights quercetin, a potent flavonoid found in high concentrations in apples and red onions. There's phycine, heavily present in strawberries, curcumin, extracted from turmeric root, and piperlongumine, derived from the long pepper plant.
In vitro studies and animal models, administering these compounds shows a dramatic, measurable clearance of senescent cells from tissues, resulting in rejuvenated tissue function.
So what does this all mean for you? Do you just eat a massive bowl of strawberries and red onions every morning and cure aging? Here is the massive, frustrating catch. The bulletin points out a critical pharmacological hurdle: bioavailability.
Bioavailability is the bane of botanical pharmacology. It refers to the exact percentage of an ingested substance that actually enters your systemic blood circulation and reaches the target tissue in an active, unaltered form.
Because digestion ruins everything.
You can swallow a gram of pure, high-quality quercetin powder, but the human digestive tract is an incredibly hostile environment designed to break things down.
It's an acid bath.
It is an acid bath in the stomach, followed immediately by exposure to aggressive brush border enzymes in the intestines. And if the molecule survives that, it is absorbed into the portal vein and sent directly to the liver. This is called first-pass metabolism.
And the liver acts as the filter.
The liver views these foreign plant compounds as potential toxins and aggressively metabolizes them. It conjugates them with other molecules to make them water-soluble so you can excrete them in your urine. These natural flavonoids have extremely poor water solubility to begin with.
So they don't even make it past the liver.
By the time that quercetin runs the gauntlet of the stomach, the intestines, and the liver, and finally reaches a zombie cell in your knee joint, the concentration is so vanishingly low it has virtually zero senolytic effect.
It's like trying to send a delicate, unarmored letter across a war zone. It just gets destroyed in transit. So how do we protect the payload? This is where the bulletin ventures into absolute sci-fi territory: nanotechnology delivery systems.
This represents the fusion of biological compounds with advanced mechanical engineering. Researchers are realizing that raw powder is insufficient. They have to design smart nanocarriers to bypass the digestive gauntlet.
And the bulletin describes in detail the engineering of mesoporous silica nanoparticles. I like to think of them as microscopic, heavily armored submarines.
I'm tracking with the submarine analogy, yeah.
The researchers load the senolytic drug let's say a concentrated quercetin derivative inside the hollow core of this silica submarine. The silica shell completely protects the drug from the stomach acid and the liver enzymes. It travels safely through the bloodstream.
But the engineering genius is the targeting system. They coat the outside of this nanoparticle submarine with specific ligand molecules that act as a homing beacon. Senescent cells, because they are damaged, overexpress a very specific enzyme on their surface called SA-beta-gal, or senescence-associated beta-galactosidase.
It's a flag that says, I'm a zombie.
Exactly. The nanocarrier is engineered to completely ignore healthy cells. But when it bumps into a cell waving the SA-beta-gal flag, it binds to it. The SA-beta-gal enzyme itself actually interacts with the cap of the nanoparticle, dissolving it.
Oh, wow.
It opens the submarine doors, releasing the massive, concentrated senolytic payload directly and exclusively into the interior of the zombie cell.
That is mind-blowing. It's a microscopic Trojan horse that uses the enemy's own enzyme to open the gates. The bulletin also mentions another method involving liposomes, which are essentially tiny engineered fat bubbles coated with a monoclonal antibody against the CD9 receptor, which is another specific flag that aging cells wave. The precision of this targeted delivery is incredible.
It maximizes the senolytic destruction of the target while minimizing any potential toxicity to the healthy surrounding tissue. It is the indisputable future of anti-aging therapeutics. Targeted molecular warfare.
However, as we both know, custom-engineered mesoporous silica nanoparticles equipped with monoclonal antibodies are not currently available on the shelf at your local supplement store.
No, they are decidedly not.
Right. Nanobots hunting zombie cells are the future, but what can you actually do today? The bulletin doesn't leave us hanging with science fiction. They outline immediate, highly practical workarounds to the bioavailability problem using currently available supplements. They categorize these strategies as co-administration and dose optimization.
If you don't have the technology to build a submarine, you have to give the compound a heavily armed escort to distract the guards. Co-administration involves taking the primary senolytic alongside a secondary compound specifically chosen for its ability to act as an absorption enhancer. The classic clinically validated example discussed in the literature is combining quercetin or curcumin with piperine. Piperine is an alkaloid extract from black pepper.
So what does the black pepper actually do?
Piperine actively inhibits specific digestive enzymes in the intestines, and more importantly, it inhibits the UGTs and CYP3A4 enzymes in the liver. It temporarily paralyzes the liver's ability to execute that first-pass metabolism we discussed.
It distracts the biochemical guards.
Exactly, allowing a vastly higher percentage of the active quercetin or curcumin to slip into the systemic bloodstream intact.
And the bulletin notes another fascinating synergy. Taking visitin alongside quercetin actually increases the bioavailability of both compounds simultaneously. They compete for the same metabolic breakdown pathways, effectively bottlenecking the liver and allowing more of both to survive.
It's a traffic jam in the liver.
And then there is the simplest, most elegant hack of all. Dose optimization based on solubility. Because all of these senolytic flavonoids are lipophilic, meaning they dissolve in fat, not water. Simply taking your senolytic supplement with a highly concentrated fat meal dramatically increases its intestinal uptake via the lymphatic system.
You don't need a billion-dollar lab for that. You just need to take it with half an avocado or a spoonful of olive oil.
It is a brilliant practical application of pharmacokinetics. Now, while we are discussing the frontiers of senolytics, we do need to impartially report on a clinical combination heavily emphasized in the bulletin. Quercetin combined with dasatinib.
Yes, the D plus Q protocol. Dasatinib is a highly potent synthetic tyrosine kinase inhibitor. It is a pharmaceutical drug, not a natural supplement.
Right. Dasatinib is primarily utilized as a chemotherapy drug for leukemia.
Yes. However, researchers discovered that in very low intermittent hit-and-run doses, combined with high-dose quercetin, this D plus Q protocol is currently the gold standard in senolytic research.
How effective is it?
In rigorous animal models and now in early human trials, it has been shown to aggressively and rapidly clear senescent cells from multiple organ systems.
But we need to be very clear here.
Very clear. Dasatinib is absolutely not FDA approved for anti-aging purposes, and we are emphatically not endorsing or suggesting its off-label use. But it is critical to impartially report the data from the source. This specific combination is currently undergoing human clinical trials right now at major institutions for treating age-related frailty and mild cognitive impairment.
It is a space the medical community is watching with intense scrutiny. We are literally figuring out the biochemical codes to force the cellular garbage to take itself out. It's the bleeding edge.
Yeah.
But I want to bring the conversation back down to earth as we move toward the end of our deep dive today.
Back to the basics.
Because nanobots and chemotherapy protocols hunting zombie cells are incredible. But if your basic metabolic house isn't in order, you are fighting a losing battle. You can't fix a crumbling foundation by painting the roof. And that brings us back to the Country File article for our final two absolute non-negotiable basic building blocks: protein and vitamin B12.
The basics are considered basic for a reason. They dictate the foundational thermodynamics of the body. Let's examine protein, specifically through the clinical lens of weight management and metabolic health.
The Country File source cites a massive 2020 systemic review analyzing 24 distinct clinical trials on high-protein diets.
And the mechanics of why increased protein intake radically alters body composition are twofold. First, protein is uniquely satiating compared to carbohydrates or fats. It heavily influences the endocrine system, specifically by suppressing ghrelin, the hormone that signals hunger to the brain, while simultaneously elevating peptide YY, which signals fullness.
So it naturally and effortlessly reduces overall caloric intake. You just aren't as hungry.
Exactly. And second, there's the metabolic boost, which is pure thermodynamics. It's known as the thermic effect of food.
Right, TOAF.
The human body has to expend energy simply to digest, absorb, and assimilate the nutrients you eat. The chemical bonds in protein are highly complex and difficult to break down. The thermic effect for fats and carbohydrates sits around 5 to 10%.
And for protein?
The thermic effect for protein can be as high as 20 to 30%.
Meaning if I eat 100 calories of pure protein, my body burns up to 30 of those calories just doing the work of digesting it.
It is a massive metabolic advantage. Furthermore, protein provides the essential amino acids required to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Skeletal muscle is highly metabolically active tissue. It requires constant energy just to exist.
Even at rest.
Especially at rest. The more lean muscle mass you carry, the higher your basal metabolic rate becomes. You naturally burn significantly more calories around the clock, even when you are sitting completely still on the couch doing nothing.
It's a compounding interest effect on your metabolism. Build a muscle, increase the baseline burn. And finally, we arrive at vitamin B12. Country File makes a very specific point of calling it an essential vitamin. We throw that word around casually in wellness circles, but biologically, it's a strict classification, isn't it?
Very strict. In biochemistry, essential means your body completely lacks the enzymatic pathways to synthesize the molecule. You can synthesize vitamin D if you expose your skin to ultraviolet light. You cannot synthesize vitamin B12. You must consume it from an external source.
And what does B12, technically known as cobalamin, actually do?
It's biochemically vital for two primary functions. First, the synthesis of red blood cells in the bone marrow. Second, it is required to maintain the myelin sheath, which is the fatty protective coating that insulates every nerve in your central and peripheral nervous system.
And if you fall into deficiency, the symptoms aren't just subtle fatigue. They are miserable and systemic. The article notes a profound 2013 study focusing on subjects with clinically confirmed low B12 levels. They were suffering from megaloblastic anemia, chronic exhaustion, muscle weakness, and shortness of breath.
Because they lacked B12, their red blood cells were malformed and overly large, meaning their blood literally couldn't carry enough oxygen to their tissues. They were suffocating on a cellular level.
That's terrifying.
The study tracked their recovery after receiving direct intramuscular B12 injections. It took roughly 51 days for their hemoglobin levels and red blood cell counts to fully normalize.
It is a stark, necessary reminder for anyone navigating the wellness space. Sometimes profound, debilitating fatigue isn't a complex mitochondrial failure requiring an expensive PQQ stack. Sometimes it is a simple, highly correctable nutrient deficiency in your fundamental biology.
It's always best to check the simple things first.
And the article gives a highly practical, actionable tip for oral supplementation here. If you are looking at a B12 bottle in the pharmacy, turn it around and look at the actual chemical ingredients. You want methylcobalamin, not cyanocobalamin.
This circles us right back to bioavailability. Cyanocobalamin is a synthetic molecule. It is cheap to produce, which is why it's in most low-tier vitamins. But it contains a cyanide molecule.
Cyanide, like the poison.
Well, yes, but in microdoses. The body has to actively expend energy to strip that cyano group off and attach a methyl group before the B12 can actually enter the methylation cycle and be used by the cells.
So you're making your body do extra work.
Exactly. Methylcobalamin, on the other hand, is the naturally occurring active form. It bypasses the liver's conversion process completely. It is instantly bioavailable to your nervous system.
Okay. We have covered an immense amount of scientific ground today. Let's tie this entire journey together. For you listening, the biggest takeaway from all these clinical sources is that supplements are not magic pills that override a bad lifestyle. They are highly specific biochemical tools.
Exactly, tools with specific purposes.
Right. Magnesium is the tool to physically plug the NMDA receptors, calm the nervous system, and repair your sleep architecture. PQQ and CoQ10 are the structural tools to build and fuel the mitochondrial turbines in your cells. High-dose creatine and omega-3s are the backup energy generators and the fluid structural armor protecting your brain's hardware. Senolytics are the experimental targeted garbage disposal system designed to clear out toxic, aging zombie cells. And adequate protein and methylated B12 are the fundamental bricks and mortar required to maintain the baseline metabolic house.
That is an excellent comprehensive synthesis of the mechanisms we've discussed. But I must add one final caveat, because knowledge is only valuable when it is applied safely and rationally.
Of course.
I must reiterate the impartial warning found across our source material today. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before altering your biological regimen. This is critically important if you have pre-existing kidney or liver issues, or if you are taking prescription medications.
Like the statins we talked about.
Exactly. As we noted, statins disrupt CoQ10. Conversely, supplementing high-dose omega-3s or CoQ10 can interact with prescribed blood thinners and alter your clotting rates. Biochemical precision requires professional, individualized guidance.
It's a murky diagnostic landscape, and you absolutely need a guide to navigate it safely. But as we close out today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought. Think back to those zombie cells and the silicon nanocarriers we discussed in the bulletin. For all of human history, medicine has been blunt force. We pour chemical into the bloodstream and hope it hits the right target without causing too much collateral damage.
The shotgun approach.
Right. But we are rapidly approaching an era of microscopic targeted warfare. If a custom-engineered nanoparticle can hunt down a single specific aging cell in your body, based purely on its chemical signature, open its doors and destroy it, without touching the healthy tissue millimeters away, what does the concept of a lifespan even mean 50 years from now? Are we on the verge of not just treating the downstream diseases of age, but making aging itself an optional, manageable condition? Something to think about.